Well, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, Managing Director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are in week 34 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and exactly 11 weeks from today is the next presidential inauguration. In the news today, the International Space Station is celebrating its 20th anniversary, and Dr. Deborah Birx wrote a memo to the White House this week that said we are entering the most deadly phase of the pandemic. Today's topic is what happened last night with the election, and our special guest is Betsy Fischer, former executive producer of Meet the Press and current executive director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University. Betsy, how are you?
I'm great. Nice to be with you, Ken.
Did you get any sleep?
I got a couple, I guess you'd say like a little power nap last night. I probably should have just gone to sleep at, 12, between 12 and 4, nothing much really happened, but I stayed up.
But it's one of these things, you probably got more sleep than you would have in your previous role, huh?
Oh yeah, exactly.
So why don't we start with the lay of the land? What happened last night? Where are we today? What can we expect over the next literally like 3 to 5 hours even?
I mean, the phrase that we kept hearing last night, too early to call, is still operational this morning, waiting on still some of these key states that, could result in that path that Biden is looking for, that blue wall having to be kind of rebuilt brick by brick or absentee voter by absentee voter, as it were. And so those numbers, Wisconsin will probably be called this morning. The Biden camp.
And that flipped overnight, really, right?
Yeah, the Biden camp feels good about that. Michigan, again, big vote by mail numbers coming in there, probably will be called by midday. Again, Biden with an eye on that. The Pennsylvania vote, it's right now definitely favoring Trump, but some of that vote by mail is coming in. Tonight or tomorrow, we should have more on that. Georgia, still out there too, some Atlanta vote. And then Nevada, strangely enough, probably won't know until tomorrow. That only has 6 electoral votes, so may not be needed if Biden is able to pull off, some of these other wins before then.
And Arizona looks like that's a solid Joe win at this point, huh?
Yeah, Arizona is looking better and better for him. So if we think about sort of, the map, and everybody's had their versions of the map flying around, right? I mean, when you look at it, as of right now, nothing has really changed since 2016. There's been no flips that have happened except for the one weird congressional seat in Nebraska. So if everything holds, Trump has to hold, his map. And so if he starts losing in places like Arizona, that would be a flip. So if right now you think about him like 305 votes, sorry, because he had 306 last time. So if you take away 11 from that with Arizona, he's down to 294. If he loses Wisconsin, again, he won that in 2016. He's down to 284. And then if you take off Michigan, he's down to 269. So, that's really what the Biden campaign is looking at, is what other states can they flip that are still outstanding?
Interesting. So if the numbers were to hold in Michigan and Wisconsin and Nevada and Arizona, that could be game, set, match at this point then, right? Because right now, if counting hypothetically stopped at this moment, it seems like Vice President Biden is ahead in those places.
He's ahead in Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona. Yeah. And then, that would if Trump lost those places, that puts him below what he needs. He'd have to pick up somewhere else. And there's the only other place he could pick up, and going back, is the Nevada 6 electoral votes in Nevada, which again, we're not probably going to know about until tomorrow, because that was a blue state in 2016.
So walk us through what's happening state by state, right? So why does it take so long for certain states to count? What's the situation this year is so unique, it seems, obviously.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you've got the 3 buckets. Yeah, you've got the 3 buckets of votes. You've got sort of the day of traditional votes, and you've got the absentee mail-in votes, and then you have the early vote to be counted. And each state is different on when they count that. And so you see in some of the states, the states last night, if you guys were watching all the map changing, And, early in the night, it was looking, some of these states that had counted their early vote early, out there, it was trending toward Biden, because we know that the early votes trend toward Biden. And so you saw that when the day of vote come in, then all of a sudden it changed toward Trump. Well, the opposite is happening right now in those states that haven't posted their early vote or absentee vote yet. Trump is ahead in some of those states, but as the early vote comes in, it's coming from those big urban areas which heavily favor Biden.
And Pennsylvania is probably the most unique of all of these states that we're kind of talking about, right? Like, so Trump is ahead by like 700,000 votes or something like that in Pennsylvania, but it's still undecided because of the magnitude of the number of uncounted ballots, right?
From the Philly area and Pittsburgh area. And so, you've got those urban centers with the big early turnout. I mean, we all saw footage over the last few weeks, really, of, lines and lines of people, waiting in big, basketball arenas to vote. Those are all in urban areas. And so those are the places that have yet to come in some of these states that we're waiting for.
Got it. Okay. So one of the things that I think came out of yesterday was almost a universal appreciation of the fact that polls are just terrible at this point, right? Like, I mean, the polls seem to be just way off on everything. So, like, walk us through that. I mean, like, you're going into election day, and, I think there's a lot of folks that thought maybe a lot of these Senate races were going to be a lot more competitive than they really turned out to be. I mean, how can they be so way off? Like, why do we continue to rely on them? Like, what's
there will be a giant postmortem on that very topic. Panels upon panels upon papers. I mean, we will
several dissertations coming out of your institute.
Is the end of the polling industry, and is there that sort of vote out there that the shy Trump voter? We heard there talk about that. I don't know. Are they oversampling in certain area, overweighting certain demographics? I don't know. I mean, even the exit poll, which I always have a ton of fun looking through, has some sort of, things that are going on in the exit poll that don't make a ton of sense. The gender gap is not as big as I thought it would be. I don't know how accurate that is.
Interesting.
But early on in the night, when you look at sort of the big picture on the exit poll, there were some troubling signs early on if you're a Biden supporter. First of all, one of the questions, what's the most important issue that you voted on, and gave 4 choices. And the majority, that 35%, the highest ranking number was the economy. And so, the majority, of those 4 choices, people saying that 35% of them saying that the economy was what they, were voting on. That is not a good sign for Biden, when Trump seems to have some of those economic voters, and who, that the question of who would be better to handle the economy, the electorate divided on that completely. 48% saying Biden, 50% saying Trump. But also, you mentioned the coronavirus, at the beginning of your intro here. This is a strange number. 48% of the electorate said that the efforts to contain the coronavirus were going well, and 50% said badly. So 48% of the electorate says that efforts, you mentioned this, is we're in the worst phase ever.
It's just like,
and 48% of the people said that it's going well. So that does not bode well if you're a Biden supporter either, hearing those numbers.
Interesting. So this has obviously been like a very chaotic election season, right? Probably like no other. So I'd love 2 things. One, what did you make of just this entire presidential campaign year, number 1? And number 2, yesterday seemed pretty normal, right? Like, there weren't, people, like, it wasn't mass chaos or hysteria. Like, it generally seemed to have been a pretty traditional election day, with folks going out there and being able to vote and know, real issues that kind of like popped up throughout the day, right? You have all of this buildup where it's like the most
we've definitely seen super high turnout rates, right? But that early vote that we keep talking about was significant because people did get out there early and vote or do mail-in because of the coronavirus. I mean, the virus has really impacted this race. I mean, when you think about Biden not really being able to be out on the ground doing some of the big rallies. Trump did them regardless of the virus, but the Biden campaign was very conservative on going out and doing those kind of big rallies. And so I think that has just impacted so many different aspects of this election, from the way people vote to the ability of campaigns to actually campaign, turn out the vote. get their voters out to the polls, do the door knocking, the tried and true sort of Democratic get out the vote operations have all been upended by this. And so that's just a big impact. But, we are seeing it's a very divided electorate, and the coalitions that exist out there are changing. The Biden coalition looks very different than the Obama coalition of 2008, which was, heavily African-American, Hispanic, and young. And now we have Biden really focusing on older voters, suburban voters, and trying to get back some of those non-college whites that they lost in 2016. So it's very much sort of the middle-class Joe coalition versus the Obama coalition. And we have seen, some of that support waning among some of those groups that Obama significantly carried, like African Americans and the Hispanic vote, which is fascinating to see, that really being peeled off by Republicans, especially, and very impactful in a state like Florida.
Yeah, Miami-Dade, right? So the Cuban vote there, the president was very intentional with his outreach over time, and that's probably going to be another case study that kind of, comes out of this as a postmortem is the efforts around the Hispanic vote, right? That seems to be really something that's going to be a big part of the analysis.
And, where they, and everybody will do sort of the, morning after quarterbacking, where should they have spent? Where should they have focused more? Where should they have put, money differently? The amount of money that was spent by Democrats to unseat Mitch McConnell, very symbolically, was not going to happen. And Mitch McConnell, winning handily, should some of that money been, diverted more to efforts in Florida? Because, if Biden had come out early in the night and won Florida, we would not be having this same exact conversation right now.
Yeah. We'd be more rested, right?
Exactly. And that's what they wanted, that sort of early night, big sweep, and obviously not to be.
So let's talk about the money in this election, right? This was really the magnitude of it. From $100 million by Mike Bloomberg to unprecedented amounts, to take on Lindsey Graham and these Senate races. So tell us a little bit more about what you saw with the money invested, and then the races that were invested in and how they turned out, and maybe not the most effective use of resources, really.
Well, Democrats did pour a ton of money into Florida. I think since Labor Day, the Biden campaign, spent $78 million on ads there. And then, of course, the Bloomberg Super PAC got in there and spent, another, $40 million. And still, he underperformed in Miami. So, a lot of money put into, for example, the Senate race in South Carolina. Jamie Harrison raising, remarkable record-setting amounts of money, raising more money than there's even time is to put ads on. There doesn't even exist that much airtime to buy ads with the amount of money he raised, and still he got handily beat in South Carolina by Lindsey Graham.
Interesting.
The money does not necessarily translate to vote.
So take us back to 2000. You were at Meet the Press. That was probably the most contentious, crazy election. What was that experience like? And then, what happened last night in newsrooms around the country that were kind of tracking this? Like, take us behind the curtain. What's it like? How do you make these calls, not make these calls? What's the pressure going on, from the media? Because I want to get into the media side of all this too, but would love to hear your kind of insight.
So in 2000, I was the executive producer of Meet the Press and the anchor producer for Tim Russert that night. So that was famously our Florida night with his whiteboard. And, we were running the numbers. We didn't have all the nice little, easy to use graphs now that you can jump on the internet and, fill out your map and the number. We were literally calculator, pen, writing on the board. And that was an all-nighter. We started at Nightly News and then turned things over to the Today Show at 6 a.m. and obviously ended up covering the race from there. But, a lot of kind of reforms within calling races kind of came out of that 2000 debacle when, of course, Florida was called early and wrongly for Gore, and then it was called for Bush, and then Bush was, pronounced president, and then Gore took his concession back, and then, we all know what happened. But, this is why we are seeing right now in some of these really close races that, the networks and AP are not calling some of these places yet until they get all of this vote counted. They're not relying on just the exit polls, which in in 2000, there was a lot of pressure on, a lot of credence given to the exit polls, and that's why they were calling some places early. And so there were a lot of reforms within the news media polling operations and sort of the, the boiler rooms and decision desks that go on that each of the networks and newspapers have to crunch the numbers and look at turnout models and all of these different factors and vote coming in and make that decision, which is why, here we are in a tight race that having some of these races called. I mean, we were talking earlier about Arizona and Fox calling Arizona relatively early for Biden, and of course the Trump people flipping out about that. Interestingly enough, it was Fox that called, but each of these networks really put their folks in sort of a sealed room and don't let them be influenced by other network calls. There's no longer this mentality of, oh, we called a state first for candidate X or candidate Y. It's much more gotten to, let's make sure it's right, and then make the call. And so they don't operate in a situation where they are even aware of what other networks or news organizations are calling, because they want their folks and their statisticians to really focus on the numbers and not be influenced competitively.
So you obviously spent so much time with Tim Russert, right? So what would he have thought of the 2000 presidential election and campaign, and also the kind of perception of media that's kind of been, playing out about fake news and all this kind of narrative?
Yeah, I mean, people ask me that question all the time about, what would Tim think about, 2016 and now, and, the polarization of this country, and, the handling of global health issues. And it's hard to imagine. But he was, and the way journalism has become, so opinionated, and I use the word journalism there with a lowercase j, because I do think when I think of Tim and some other reporters on television now with a capital J, journalism is not being partisan, not showing bias, but it's very hard to find straight down the middle actual reporting, especially when you're looking at cable television right now. And it's become a very partisan environment, and you can really operate in, two so totally different realities. I'm teaching a course right now at American University on politics in the television age. And so, we're studying how television is, covering this campaign. And we've also gone back and, studied that, television moments of past campaigns and things that happen now, even just thinking about the debates, and going through with the class, some, debate viral moments of the past, and, remembering Al Gore sighing in 2000, right? We talked about that for days and weeks, and, it seems very, very quaint compared to the conduct of debates going on now. And so the world has changed. It's a different environment. It's more partisan. It's more opinionated, and that comes through in the media as well, unfortunately.
So overnight, Vice President Biden went out and made remarks and, made a case of why he thinks he's on the road to victory. And then the president obviously came out and kind of proclaimed victory and kind of alluded to a potential Supreme Court fight. And, we just had a question come in, and they were asking, can you envision a role of the Supreme Court in coming to a head during this process? And then how do you see kind of the president's narrative playing out over the next day or two? And, where are we on that and potential legal battles? And, I think there were a couple of cases today that are being heard in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. So,
this is another, another lesson learned from 2000 really is, the optics of a campaign coming out and, what they say election night really. And after 2000, we saw this, the fight after election night on 2000 was really a fight, made on sort of the airways and in the media. And Bush positioned himself from the get-go as the winner, and Gore was seen as the sore loser, and that narrative played out, and ultimately, of course, he lost. And so the lessons politically from some of those campaigns is do not concede, do not, be in the position of making a concession and then having to take it back. And so you see optically, of course, what the president did last night, coming out to his supporters and, essentially declaring himself the winner. Now, in our system of government, it doesn't really work that way. And a lot of the news organizations were quick to point that out. But nevertheless, it was important for them politically to be seen as the potential winner in the race, and that Biden would be sort of the sore loser trying to catch up. And so I think optically and politically, that's what you saw played out. But yes, there will be, depending on these numbers coming in, right? If they're super close, we'll see more of an appetite to fight that in the courts. And lawyers are certainly in on the cases right now, but it was to be expected in a lot of ways. Both sides had ramped up for this to happen and have their folks in place to sort of make the legal arguments that they need to make. Whereas in 2000, I think a lot of the teams were caught off guard by what happened, and they were, scrambling and just sending bodies down to Florida with a legal degree, trying to figure out what was going on. And I think now, they were ready for the potential, right? And certainly Trump had alluded to this on many occasions, the potential for, having to fight some of these election battles in court.
So one of the most amazing things, I guess, in the last 4 years has been just the number of women running for office, right? I think Emily's list, reported that 60,000 women had signed up to run for office, just in the last year or so, or since 2016. So tell us about the state of women in politics, and what did you see last night in terms of victories? And, has it been on the Democratic side, both? Like, how's it playing out?
I think the big story in terms of women in politics is the Republican women that, managed to win last night. In 2018, of course, Year of the Woman, we saw so many, 36 new women elected to Congress, but interestingly enough, 35 of the 36 were Democratic women. Only one Republican woman was elected in 2018, and that was a wake-up call for the Republican Party, quite frankly. And running an institute whose mission statement is to close the gender gap in political leadership, you cannot work toward a goal of having a 50-50 equal representation in Congress of women and men when one party is that far behind on electing women. And so the Republican Party really stepped up and put a lot of money and effort into recruiting viable women candidates in some key races. They're, super PACs like View PAC and Winning for Women. The recruitment chair of the NRCC, Susan Brooks, and the executive director of the NRCC put a lot of effort into this. We did a couple of interviews with them on a program we have called Women on Wednesdays. And they really put the time and the effort into recruiting these women, and it's paid off. As of right now, I think my count is up to 12 new Republican women entering Congress, versus the one from last time. So that is significant. And, a few of them actually beat Democratic women in 3 of those races, Democratic women incumbents. And we're seeing some Democratic women incumbents losing, like Donna Shalala, Karen Horn, and a few others. So I think the big story for when you think about women in politics is that the Republicans have actually are bringing more new women into Congress, which is, I think, overall, when you care about representation and equality in the numbers, a good thing. The numbers, the Senate races certainly were not what they had hoped on the Democratic side. There's not a lot of pickups there. It looks like Susan Collins will probably pull out her victory in Maine. Joni Ernst in Iowa was sort of a Democratic target, and she's been reelected. The Democrats had women candidate running in Kansas who didn't win. And so, it's a little bit of more of a mixed bag in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, so we're at 47-47 with the likely kind of outstanding ones leaning more Republican. So it really wasn't, despite the massive turnout, necessarily a big blue wave per se, right? This was
really a very static election in many ways. Not a lot of change going on. Certainly not a wave one way or the other. It's just sort of, as we look, at the presidential map, kind of stuck right now too. It hasn't changed a lot since 2016.
So if we have some clarity in the next day or two, and hypothetically, if Vice President Biden were to win, what do you make of the next 11 weeks of this transition period, right? Like, this is a period of time where usually like the Bush-Obama transition is referred to as one of the more cordial and well done transitions. How do we play out over the next 11 weeks? What can we expect? How do you think it goes? What happens?
Yeah, I don't see Trump like leaving a friendly note in the Oval Office for Joe Biden. I don't see a lot of that probably going to happen, especially if we're in sort of a prolonged legal battle. And, the Bush folks will tell you, even, again, going back to 2000, the transition component of having to wait for weeks and weeks to really start in full that transition of government really did affect their ability to, get the right people in positions, starting the confirmation process and the preparations that it takes. I mean, transitioning an entire government is no small feat. It's not just the guy in the White House. It is, it's a lot. And so there really has to be time in order for that to happen. And both of the certainly the Biden campaign has a transition team already in place. They've sort of been working behind the scenes. But that the more it's delayed, the more that will impact, their ability to sort of hit the ground running in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 1,000 positions that need Senate confirmation, usually relying on like a tremendous amount of coordination between both sides to kind of do handoffs. And we're also in a pandemic, so I think that's also going to kind of add to it. Real quick, what are your thoughts on just kind of the misinformation out there, the social media impact on politics, like at a high level? Obviously, you spend so much time in television, but how do you kind of now look at what's happening with our access to technology and information through our smartphones and social media and, Facebook, Twitter, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, we're unfortunately in an environment where, Twitter has to, censor the president's tweets essentially and clarify that they're, misinformation. It's sort of a sad predicament that we find ourselves in. But, there is, definitely was a concerted effort this year to, by the technology companies, who really had their feet to the fire. I mean, obviously, I think this is a voluntary thing. But so many of them, putting things in place to flag disinformation, to have more accountability and transparency involved in the process. But there's no doubt, that misinformation gets thrown around, sources out on, the internet that, one of the things, again, this class that I'm teaching, we do a lot of study on sort of media bias and, what exists out there. And, I'm teaching them to sort of, improve their media literacy and learn to identify, certain, internet publications that may sound like a news organization, but aren't. And, it's amazing when you look through the eyes of, an 18, 19-year-old, and they don't really understand the difference between, what is, not a legitimate news organization and an agenda-seeking website and an actual, mainstream news organization. So working with them on trying to, pick up those clues, decipher, issues about reliability and veracity, and all of these components that go into, really being a smarter news consumer.
Yeah. So in closing, real quick, if Vice President Biden pulls this off, he'll have a very difficult time, it would look like, to govern, right? With Republicans probably holding the Senate, margins in the House shrinking. What does governing in 2021 look like for Americans when they look at Washington now?
Look, I mean, it's going to be a classic divided government. I mean, this is by no means a sweeping mandate on one way or the other. And, for people who were hoping sort of this blue wave that was going to, carry Biden through early and, sweep these Senate races and bring more races to the House. I mean, that is clearly not happening. So we are in for, more contention, more fighting back and forth. That, is going to certainly continue, even if Biden does manage to pull this out.
Anything people should keep an eye out for the next 24 hours? Is it even possible
Keep
for
refreshing on your computer the vote that's coming in on your website of choice, and watching these counts come in, and with your handy map calculator and running the scenarios. Right, that's what I'm going to be doing for the next few hours.
Amazing. Well, look, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Obviously, I think this was well timed for us to have you on to kind of shed some light and give us some insight about what it's like behind the scenes and what we can kind of expect over the next 24 hours. So appreciate everyone else tuning in for your questions and for participating. Our next Coffee with Ken is going to be tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. We have David Rubenstein, the co-founder of the Carlyle Group, on as well. So in the meantime, practice social distancing, wash your hands, and wear a mask. Thanks so much. Betsy will be in touch.
Okay, great.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks.
Everybody.